You could argue that if Sable Wren had stayed sober that night, she would never have offered to run the richest alpha in the city straight out of his own tower. But you could argue just as easily that if that same alpha had bothered to run his house like a wolf who cared whether it stood, she'd never have needed the 6 drinks that made the offer sound reasonable. Follow the thread back to the spool, and you land on one tidy conclusion. The whole catastrophe was his fault. Start to finish, top to bottom, his Sable was not a drinker. She was, if anything, the one who counted everyone else's drinks and relocated the car keys night lead of security for Vale Tower, a whole life built on being the sober one in the room. But somewhere past the 4th whiskey, the edges of the long watch had gone warm and golden, and the part of her brain that counted things had closed its ledger and gone home. Which was roughly how she came to be up on a bar stool, one boot on the seat, holding her glass aloft like a woman about to declare a small and personal war. "I could run that building better than Vale himself," she announced, half asleep. Both hands zip-tied, the table erupted. Somebody's beer went over, foam sheeting across a spread of playing cards. Nobody had been playing. "To the boss we actually deserve," howled Tobin, youngest of the night crew, all elbows and enthusiasm, and the rest drank to it. Because they were tired and she was funny and the drinks were cheap. "I'm serious," Sable said. "Give me 1 week with a free hand up there and I'd have the whole thing running clean." "Running clean? How?" said Neve, grinning at her over the rim of a glass. Neve grinned the way other people sharpened knives. "Where do I even start?" Sable set her whiskey down with the enormous care of a woman aware she was swaying. "Requisitions. We order 40 textas, we get 12. The door sensors for the East Freight Bay just vanish into a scuspede. I've spent 5 nights this week untangling supply chains instead of guarding anything, and half the work orders contradict the other half." "Sounds like bad luck," Neve said, pushing another drink into her hand. "It isn't luck. It's neglect." The whiskey had the wheel now, and it drove with confidence, because the wolf sitting at the very top has no idea any of it's even happening. Too busy cutting ribbons and beaming at shareholders to notice his own building is rotting up from the loading dock. "Strong words," said a dry voice at her left elbow. Sable turned. She hadn't noticed him sit down, and noticing people sit down was professionally the entire point of her. A man in a plain gray hoodie, the hood still up in all that warmth, a glass of something dark in one hand he hadn't tasted. Only the bottom of his face showed, the hint of a smile, not strong. "True," she said, and stretched. "The alpha who owns that tower ought to know what happens inside it. This one couldn't find his own server room with a map in both hands." "He's young," the stranger offered. "New to the chair? Perhaps no one's told him that inventory has a way of sprouting legs? Then nobody's doing their job, him included." She jabbed a finger at the sticky bar. "He's the alpha. Not knowing is the one thing he doesn't get to be. And you'd put all that to the alpha's face, would you?" "I'd put worse." The table whooped, and the approval hit her bloodstream faster than the whiskey had. "You think he's ever worked a 14-hour post on a bad knee because nobody scheduled the relief? You think he's had to hold a kid like Tobin's eye and tell him he's pulling a double? He hasn't a clue how the rest of us get by. And it's never cost him a wink of sleep." Then the stranger raised a hand, in no particular hurry, and slid the hood back off his head. Sable's first thought, drunk, instant, treasonous against her own survival, was a resentful little "oh, that isn't fair." Because she knew the face under that hood. She walked past it 100 times a day, 3 stories tall on the lobby wall. What the photographer had caught was the light brown hair and the easy jaw. What he'd missed was the sharp gray eyes that didn't match the affable mouth beneath them, and that mouth already sliding into a slow, certain smile purpose-built to take sensible women apart. Sable registered, with awful clarity, that she wouldn't have minded being kissed by that mouth. It made her livid. "Emmerich Vale," the man said pleasantly, as if they were being introduced at a garden party. "And you are?" The noise bled out of that corner of the bar, the way a room goes quiet when a tray hits the floor, until the loudest thing left was the mortified ringing in Sable's own ears. Tobin found his voice first. It came out as a horrified whisper. "Sir," he half stood, half bowed, and knocked his own chair over. Somewhere far below the whiskey, Sable's wolf sat up and advised urgently that she stop talking now. "Huh," she said. "You're less tall than your picture downstairs." "Am I?" Vale's brows rose. "I'll have the photographer let go." Sable bit her tongue. Too late. "So," he said, and the warmth in his voice didn't flicker once, which unnerved her more than temper would have. "You honestly think you could teach me something about running my own tower?" "I think you haven't the first clue what my job actually costs," she said. "And if the place were mine to run, I'd run it a great deal better than you managed to." He leaned in, and he pitched it like a dare, low and delighted. "Then prove it. 7 days you run my operation from the inside, my access, my authority, no leash on you, and when the 7 are up, we'll find out which of us was right." A test, Sable thought, thoroughly pleased with herself. He was waiting for her to flush and stammer and walk it back, the way everyone caved when an alpha lifted an eyebrow. Well, he'd bet on the wrong drunk. "Done," she said, and thumped the bar. 7 days, and no takebacks. Vale, shake on it. The whole bar leaned in. A stool scraped. A hand of cards went face down, forgotten. Nobody drank. Vale's gray eyes moved over her face like a wolf who'd turned over a rock and found something more interesting than he'd bargained for, and he put out his hand. 7 days, he agreed. "Though you ought to hear what happens on the last one before you." And then the room tipped gently onto one shoulder. The floor and the ceiling traded places without consulting her, and Sable Wren's knees gave out from under her. And the last thing she carried down into the dark was the shape of his still waiting hand, the terms of that 7th day, unspoken, unheard, and hers to discover the hard way. Asterisk, asterisk. Sable came awake, certain she'd died sometime before dawn, and that wherever she'd landed, somebody had left every light in the place burning. She was in her own bed, at least. Against all odds, she'd gotten herself home. She held still and let the night filter back in fragments that wouldn't line up. The amber warmth of the long watch, a card game, laughter, her own voice pitched too loud. She turned the pieces over, learned nothing, and shelved the night under far too much whiskey. And not once more. There'd been a man in it, a dry voice, gray eyes. That was the last agreeable thing she'd feel for a good while. "Look who's breathing," Nev said from the doorway. Sable pried one eye open. Nev stood arms crossed. Tobin behind her, and behind Tobin 2 more of the night crew she couldn't resolve into single copies. "Go away," Sable rasped. "Rough one," Tobin ventured, picking each word up with tongs. "Yes, I overdid it. It won't be repeated." The confession scraped worse than her skull. She was the one who stayed steady while everyone else fell over, and she braced for them to make her pay for it. Not one of them laughed. Nev and Tobin swapped a glance instead, fast and bleak. "What?" Sable said. Nev winced. "You genuinely don't remember any of it." "I remember plenty to be ashamed of. We can leave it there." "We really can't," said Tobin. And then, with a cheer that convinced absolutely no one, "But it'll blow over. He's not going to take anything said by a wolf that far gone to heart. He can't." Tobin. Nev dropped his name on him like a lid. "Best case, she loses the night lead." Tobin plowed on. "Worst case." "What?" Sable repeated, sitting up far too fast. "Are the lot of you talking about?" Neve came down to a crouch at her level, the way you lower yourself beside something hurt. "There's no gentle way to land this," she sighed. "You informed Emeric Vale that he's shorter than the picture of him in the lobby." Sable stared. "The Emeric Vale, as in the alpha whose name is on your paychecks. That one. I told the most powerful wolf in the city he was short." Her voice went up a register. "That wasn't the half of it," Tobin confirmed. Wretched. Sable drew breath to tell them this was somebody's idea of a joke, and her certainty died in her throat, because she could hear it, her own level, drunk voice, laying the words out, flat as pavement. He hasn't the faintest idea how the rest of us live, and that one line hauled the rest up behind it, the hood shoved back by a lazy hand, the sharp gray eyes that refused to match the easy mouth they sat above. No, she said, more to the memory than to Nev. She'd called him careless, to his face, the alpha of the whole territory. Careless, and she'd taken that for rock bottom. Then, the floor gave way to a lower one. After the insults, there'd been a handshake. A dare. 7 days. No take-backs. She had, blackout drunk, argued her way into a signed arrangement with Emmerich Vale in front of 30 witnesses. And the true horror of it, the part she couldn't forgive herself for, was that she had no memory of what she'd shaken hands on. Something to do with the final day, something he'd been partway through, saying, "Ren." The door at the end of the corridor banged open. One of the day shift runners leaned in wide-eyed. "Dahl wants you. His office now." Tubin's hopeful expression folded itself quietly away. A summons from Merrick Dahl, captain of the Tower Watch. Merrick, who'd hauled a snarling 13-year-old out of a district group home and seen something worth training when nobody else would, for Merrick to call her down like this. The trouble ran all the way up the building. She got up. She dressed, her stomach churned the whole way down, and the whiskey was only part of it. An alpha who let a drunk officer mock him and wander off grinning, advertised for the next insult. Vale would have to make an example of her. All that remained undecided was the size of it. She kept promising herself the worst on the table was the job, and kept not managing to believe it. He could finish her career in a single sentence, and not one wolf in the territory would object. And even supposing he didn't, then what? This was the only thing she'd ever done well. By the time she reached Merrick's door, her fingertips had gone cold. She knocked. "In," Merrick called. She tried to read him and came up with nothing gray at the temples, jaw locked, both hands flat on the wood. Maybe he only had the outline of it, the gossip catching the edges and missing the middle. Maybe Vale wanted the whole thing shoveled under. "Tell me the building's got it garbled," Merrick said. "Tell me you did not climb onto a barstool in a crowded bar and challenge the alpha of this territory to a contract." Sable closed her eyes. "Sir, let me explain." But there was nothing to explain, and both of them knew it. Marek, who'd once talked an armed intruder into setting his weapon down without lifting his voice, sat there, now looking plainly, openly frightened. "What did you say to him?" he asked. "It's mostly a blur, sir." Her throat had tightened. "But he didn't read as angry, I thought." "He's the Alpha Ren." Marek's voice went low. "He doesn't have to be angry. He can do anything he pleases. We need to start putting together a defense," before the private elevator chimed. Marek's head lifted. Only one wolf in the tower had the clearance to bring that car down to the security level unannounced. Marek quit breathing. Sable saw the same idea land on him in the second it landed on her. Footsteps in the corridor. Not the weighted march of an escort come to make an arrest. A single wolf. Unhurried. Easy. Headed this way. The footsteps halted outside the door, and Sable's heart drove once against her ribs hard. Emmerich Vale hadn't sent for her. Emmerich Vale had come himself. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The door opened, and the alpha of the entire territory stepped into the small gray office, and the room changed. Sable felt it before she'd finished turning, the air pulling taut, her wolf snapping to attention like a recruit caught slouching. She'd known he was the alpha, but the hooded man at the Long Watch had let her forget it. This version let nobody forget a thing. He took up the doorway, and then the office broad through the shoulders, moving without hurry. And he was, she made herself finish the thought, beautiful. What she hadn't braced for was the sheer weight of him. The unbothered certainty of a wolf who had never once had to lift his voice to be obeyed. Drunk, she'd called him a boy. Standing here sober, she understood she'd been very, very stupid. "Ah," Vale said, and gave her a slow look that started at her boots and took its time. There she is. My 7-day miracle. Sable froze. Your Majesty. Marek started, then caught himself. Vale wasn't a king, only the nearest thing the city had. Sir, forgive me. My officer was gravely drunk last night, which is my failure to answer for. If discipline's warranted, let me be the one to hand it down and let it stay quiet. Vale listened, head tilted, and Sable sensed he wasn't merely hearing the words but pricing them, turning each over for what it cost. Then the smile returned. Discipline, he echoed, delighted. Doll, you can't mean you want to discipline my new right hand yourself. I'd take it terribly personally. A beat of pure silence. Sir? Marat tried again. Please don't joke. Ren is a good officer. She is. I could tell that at a glance. Vale's gray eyes cut to her, which is exactly why I intend to hold her to every word she shook on. 7 days, Ren. Full access. My authority. No leash. Starting this morning, he tucked his hands into his pockets, entirely at ease. You told me you could run my operation better than I do. So run it. I'll be watching. Sable's mouth had gone dry. Sir, last night I was well out of line. I insulted you, and what came after I've got no defense for. Whatever Doll decides is fine by me. There's no call to pull the executive floor into a joke. You keep calling it a joke. Vale dropped into the chair across the desk as though it were his, which, technically, everything in the building was. I don't recall laughing. Did I laugh, Doll? I wasn't there, sir? No, you weren't. But 30 of my people were, and by now the whole tower knows the night lead challenged the Alpha, and the Alpha said yes. Something flickered under the ease, there, and gone. So consider how it looks, if I take it back. A wolf who folds the morning after is a wolf you can push. I don't get to be pushable, Ren. That's the one thing this chair doesn't allow. He smiled again. Warmer? Worse. Besides, I find I want to see you try. Marek's jaw worked. Sir, with respect, you cannot simply install a night officer over, can't I? Vale said it mildly, and the temperature of the room dropped 3 degrees, without his voice changing at all, and Marek shut his mouth. There's the other matter, of course. Vale's attention came back to Sable, and now there was something deliberate in it. You'll have heard the Rourke pack arrives Thursday. Alpha Rourke and his heir, to sign a merger that half my board has spent a year trying to sink. Rourke is old-fashioned. He does not do business with a wolf. He thinks is alone at the top, with no one steady beside him. A pause. For 7 days, Ren, you're going to be steady beside me, publicly. My second, my shadow, the one who has my back in every room. Which means, as of this morning, and here he leaned in and dropped his voice to something meant only for her, as far as this tower is concerned, I've asked you to stay, and you said yes. Sable's stomach dropped clean through the floor. Stay, she repeated. Stay. His gray eyes held hers. At my side, my chosen second. War? Everyone out there is going to assume it means rather more than a job. An Alpha doesn't hand a stranger the keys to his whole operation unless there's a reason bone deep enough to justify it. Let them assume. It's tidier than the truth. A bond, she thought, and nearly said it aloud. That was the assumption he was inviting. The only thing that made a drunk stranger's promotion into destiny instead of scandal. He wanted the tower to look at her and see a mate, a fated thing. So no one asked the far more dangerous question of why he'd really done it. And there it was, the exact shape of the trap. Deny it, and she was a guard who'd talked her way above her station, laughed back to the freight bay by lunch. Allow it, and the whole absurd affair became destiny, past reach. Either way, she was already inside, and he'd built it in under a minute, smiling the whole time. Why? She managed. Why me? You could pull any executive in this building to stand beside you Thursday. Why hand it to the woman who called you short in a bar? For half a second something real moved behind the charm. She'd have missed it if faces weren't her trade. Then it was gone. Because you meant it, he said simply. Now, doll? He rose unhurried, and the audience was plainly over. Increase the tower watch, through the end of the week. That business on the North Road last month has sat badly with me, and I'd rather be embarrassed by too many guards than caught short by too few. Merrick went still. The North Road, sir, the accident. Vale's smile didn't waver, but it didn't reach his eyes. Humor an anxious wolf, double the watch. He paused at the threshold, looked back at Sable one last time, and every trace of the performance dropped off his face for one heartbeat. Day one starts now, Ren, he said quietly. Try to stay close to me. It's safer, for both of us if you do. Then the charm slid back into place, and he was gone. And Sable stood in the little gray office, the apology going cold in her mouth, and the dawning certainty that Emmerich Vale had not chosen her to prove a point about supply chains at all. Asterisk, asterisk. They gave her a car that night. Black, silent, the leather smelling of money, and Sable, who'd spent her career standing outside cars like this, sat in the back and felt like contraband. Dinner waited at the top of the tower in a glass room she'd only seen on a fire stairs schematic. The city burned gold 100 floors down. Vale was already there, jacket off, sleeves turned back, and she hated that her eyes found his forearms first. You look like a woman being marched to a disciplinary hearing, he observed. I look like a night officer in a room she doesn't belong in. You belong wherever I say you do this week. That was the deal. He drew out a chair for her. She didn't take it. He smiled and sat down anyway. Sit, Ren. I don't bite my own second. It's terrible for morale. She sat. Someone poured wine. She looked at it and her stomach rolled. And Vale, watching, always watching, lifted 2 fingers and the glass was quietly replaced with water. He said nothing. Somehow, the not saying landed harder than a joke would have. Here's a thought. Since it's only day 2 of 7, he said, turning his water glass a quarter turn. When the week's up, I don't think I'm going to want to give you back. You'll survive it, she said, and he only smiled, as though he'd said nothing he didn't mean. You've gone quiet, he said. Halfway through a meal, she barely touched. Go on, ask me the thing you actually came up here to ask. You've been holding it since the elevator. She met his eyes. Why me? Really? And don't say, the merger. You could have hired a bodyguard with better manners and a cleaner file than mine. Because you told me the truth, to my face, without knowing it was my face, he said. Everyone in this building learned to smile at me before they learned my name. You stood on a bar stool and told me my house was rotting from the dog up. I found it refreshing. That's not an answer. That's a compliment wearing an answer's coat, he laughed, surprised out of himself, and it rearranged his whole face. You are going to be exhausting. Fine, then show me. It's day 2, and you swore you'd run my operation better than I do. So stop guessing at me, and show me the rot, I'll follow. She'd meant to walk him through it like an inspection. Instead, the moment the freight doors rolled back, and the cold machine smell of her floor closed over her, something the glass room had been strangling all night loosened. 40 tack vests, requisitioned, she said, running her hand down a rack of empty pegs. 12 delivered. Same story with the door sensors, the radios, the lot every month. It goes up the chain and dies somewhere above me, and nobody upstairs has ever once cared how a night floor actually runs. She braced for the executive platitude. Instead, he said, show me the shift board. She blinked. The what? The board. You keep one, I'd assume. He put out his hand, waiting. You told me to show you. I'm letting you show me. There was something almost boyish in the eagerness. A wolf handed a puzzle he wanted to crack. She lifted the battered tablet off its dock and handed it over, and the moment his thumb landed on the 3rd row, she blurted, no, right there, the East Bay double up. He glanced up and she registered. She'd drifted in close over the screen. She cleared her throat and tapped the line. That's where the waste really lives. 2 officers standing a post that needs one, because the order came down twice and nobody killed the first copy. So, cancel it. I'm night lead, I flag it. It goes up, and it dies. You have the authority now. Consider that a standing order from the top. Cut anything that's bleeding this floor for no reason tonight. Who signs off when doll's off the floor? He asked. Whoever's closest to the terminal and feeling important. It came out drier than she'd meant. He laughed again. Let me guess. 3 contradictory work orders a week. All stamped urgent. All useless. The moment you try to run them together. And when it goes wrong, it lands on you. Never on whoever up the chain keeps signing them. Kept my people where they were and prayed. Nobody noticed. She met his eyes. For a moment his smile thinned into something that wasn't a smile. Yes, he said almost to himself. It would, wouldn't it? Then he handed the tablet back. So cut it. All of it. Tonight. She stared at him. You cannot actually mean that? I never say things. I don't mean. It's an underrated vice. He reached past her for the tablet again, his sleeve brushing her arm, and she thought, he's doing that on purpose, except he wasn't looking at her. He was reading the roster. Frowning. Actually reading it. Something warm and dangerous unfolded in her chest, and she resented every degree of it. They crossed back through the garage a little after midnight, and Sable heard it first. A scrape. Rubber on concrete, off to the left, where the pillar shadows pooled thick and the overhead lights had been out. She noted with a cold drop, one bay, too long. Problem, Vale said, far too loud. Is this the moment you finally break and confess? You find me irresist. She hauled him sideways by the collar. The shot spat off the pillar where his head had been, a flat crack eating itself in a suppressor, and concrete dust burst white across his shoulder. Was I just shot at? Vale asked, in the tone of a man inquiring about the weather down. Behind the wheel, she shoved him against the nearest car and put her body between him and the dark. Stay still and let me read it. It's surely nothing. Some contractor with a nervous trigger. Quiet. Footsteps. More than one set, spreading wide. Not panic spacing. Training. That's not building security, she breathed, blade already in her hand. Because a gun is loud and a knife is certain, and she'd always trusted the certain thing. They broke from the dark altogether, 4 of them. Faces, wrapped. And why cover your face at all unless you mean to be seen and walk away after? The first came fast. She caught his wrist, turned the strike past her hip, stepped inside and stamped his knee sideways. He folded with a sound like wet wood. Behind you, Vale said, calm as church, and she dropped. A blade hissed through the air her skull had occupied, came up elbow first into a throat, and the second man sat down and stopped mattering. The third went wide, past her straight for Vale, with the knife up. She threw herself across the gap. The edge caught her forearm, a bright line of cold that would be fire in a minute, but she was already wrenching his arm back until the knife dropped from it, and he went down hard. A whistle split the garage. Short, clean, 2 notes. The 2 left on their feet, disengaged together, not scattering, not bolting, pulling back in good order, the way trained wolves leave a job that's run too long. Then, silence crashed back down. Only her breath, the tick of a cooling engine, the blood running warm into her palm. Well, Vale said, straightening his cuffs as though he'd merely spilled something. I'll say this. An evening with you does not drag. She turned on him. You're not surprised. Somebody just put a round past your skull and you haven't so much as blinked, and then it dropped into place. The North Road, last month. The accident doll doubled the watchover. She said it slowly, reading his face for the flinch that never came. This hasn't happened just once, has it? Somebody wants you dead, Vale? And you already knew it. For half a heartbeat, the ease dropped, clean off him and something raw showed through. Then it was gone. You're bleeding, he said, gentle as anything. Come on, let's close that arm up. She kept the arm. What are you? She thought, watching him. A boy playing at Alpha, or something that had let her mistake it for one. She couldn't tell yet. But she'd started a tally, and the column of things that refused to add up grew longer by the hour. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. For the next 3 days, Sable did the one sensible thing left with a wolf who'd shrugged off a bullet past his skull in his own garage. It was what she was good at. She watched, gathered, built theories the way other people built card houses. Was the whole contract a shield, a trained wolf welded to his side? He could keep close without explaining why. The invented mate story just cover for a bodyguard he didn't want his board to know he needed? Every night she came up with a new shape for it, and every night, Vale declined to fit any of them. "You've gone strange." Nev informed her on the third night, dropping onto the bench beside her. "Strange how? Soft around the edges. You keep smiling at nothing, and then getting angry that you did it." Knave popped the cap off a drink and studied her over it. "The whole floor's got opinions, you know. Half of them think you two are the real thing. The other half think he's using you for something and you're too far gone to see it. And which half are you?" "I'm the half that's known you 9 years and has never once watched you lose your footing over a man." Neva's grin faded a notch into something more careful. "Just keep count, Sable. Whatever this is, you're the one who always keeps count. Don't stop now because his smile's a nice one." Sable told her with total conviction that she was keeping perfect count. It was the first outright lie she'd told a friend in years. He would not be pinned down, ask him something straight, and he'd hand back a joke. Push, and he'd tilt the conversation off its axis with something easy and glittering, and she'd look up to find they'd drifted 3 subjects from where she started. She backed him into a literal corner once, by the freight lift. "Give me one name, Vale, just one, and I can keep you breathing." And he told her suspicion was a very good look on her, and he'd like to see more of it, and sent her off with nothing usable, and an armful of things she couldn't find a shelf for. So she stopped asking him, and started asking the building. That, at least, could not flirt. She pulled the requisition logs going back a year, and what she found wasn't chaos. Chaos is random, and this had a shape. The missing vests, the vanished sensors, the doubled orders that emptied a budget line and then canceled themselves. Run end to end, they didn't look like a neglected floor. They looked like a floor being bled, carefully, by someone who knew how much could go missing before anyone above the night shift bothered to count. Every thread ran upward, past her pay grade, into the part of the chain she wasn't cleared to see, and she made herself stop before they arrived anywhere with a name on it, because some doors you don't open at 3 in the morning alone. Because here was the trouble. The longer she studied him for danger, the more she simply studied him. It came on the way weather comes on. No single moment she could point to and call the start. The first time he wandered into the equipment room, while she squared away the ready racks, he propped a shoulder in the doorway, with the overhead light running white down his neck, and she forgot, mid-syllable, what she'd been about to say. "You stopped," he said, pleased about it. "I'm working." She was not working. She was cataloging the line of his jaw. She caught herself, went furious, and went right on doing it. He turned up at the roof deck post at the dead center of a night watch with 2 paper cups, and when he passed hers, over their fingers overlapped for half a second, and the whole length of her arm woke up. She rescued the cup on reflex, and covered the rest by scowling at the skyline. "You're not watching the city," he said, low, amused, pitched for no one but her. It walked straight down the back of her neck. "The city can look after itself. It's badly upstaged tonight." He turned to consider her with no hurry and no shame, and Sable, who had faced 4 armed men in a garage without a dry mouth, couldn't hold his gaze past a second before it broke and ran. He watched her lose that small contest, said nothing, and drank his coffee like a wolf pocketing a win. That was the part she couldn't bear. He was toying with her in the open, and she could never take the measure of how much he meant. There were 2 wolves in him she couldn't reconcile. The ribbon cutter, the shareholder's darling, and the one she caught in the seams, reading a roster like scripture, never touching the wine at his own table, always a wall at his back, and a sightline to the door. One of them was a performance, she couldn't decide which, and the not deciding had begun keeping her up at night for reasons that had nothing to do with the job. She had no idea which she was tipping over for, the clown or the thing wearing the clown. But she lay in her bunk, after the late shifts, blood running loud, sleep on the far side of the building, and her thoughts went to him without permission. Not his rank, not the mystery of him. His hands mostly, the low sound of his voice, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, and she despised herself for it, and did not stop. Which was how it came to the fifth night, and the equipment room, and no excuse at all. He walked in and settled on the bench opposite her as though he'd done it 100 times, though he never had. No tablet, no question about the watch. Nothing that gave the visit a category, only him in the low light, watching her clean a blade she'd already cleaned twice. "What do you want?" she said. It came out raw. It came out like a woman at the end of something, Ren. "No. I've reached the end of it." Her hands had a tremor in them and she didn't care. "Every day. You won't tell me what you actually want and you won't let me be. And I can't. I can't keep living inside this. Tell me it's a con. Tell me you only wanted a blade you could rely on. Tell me anything with edges I can hold, because I wasn't built to want what I can't have." Her voice broke straight across the middle. "And you're making me want." She stopped far too late. "Want what?" Vale said low. "Not teasing now, not anything now." And he stood up. Asterisk. Asterisk. He came around the bench slowly, the way you close on something that might bolt, and stopped an arm's length off. "Say it," he said. "Or tell me to leave. Tell me to walk out of this room and I'll go, and I'll never trouble you with any of it again. Say nothing at all, and I stay." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "Ask me to stay, Ren, just this once, and I'm yours for the asking." The equipment room had gone very still. Her pulse was anything but. "Men like you," she managed, "don't go for women like me." But it left her as a whisper, and her eyes had dropped to his mouth again, and they both knew that for the surrender it was. "You don't believe me." His hand rose, stopped short of her face, waiting. "So, make me prove it wrong. Stay." The word was out before she decided to give it. He kissed her, and every watchful, calculating instinct Sable owned went dark and quiet. One hand found the back of her skull, the other spread warm along her jaw. There was no post to hold, no room to clock, no exit to keep in the tail of her eye, only the hum of the lights and the press of his mouth and the simple fact of him filling all the space where her vigilance usually lived. Her spine forgot the job it had held for 30 years. Some small, helpless sound got away from her, and she'd have been mortified if she'd had a single thought left to spare on it. Because Sable had only ever been valued for useful things, her hands, her aim, the watch you could set a clock by, never once for nothing but herself. She fisted a hand in his collar and held on, and for the length of that one kiss, she let every wall drop and let herself want him back, plainly, the way she'd spent days, refusing to admit she did. And there, with her guard finally all the way down and her heart wide open, the thing happened. Something spilled into her through the kiss itself. Relief and fear and a fierce, aching tenderness, braided together, none of it hers. She could feel him, his whole interior weather, sharp and vivid and unmistakably not her own, seeping in like light under a shut door. Sable jerked back with a gasp, hard enough that her shoulders hit the wall. Vale's eyes came open, pupils blown wide. For a heartbeat neither moved, and she watched the same impossible knowledge surface in his face that had gone off like a flare in hers. His hand lifted toward her, not to hold her down, but to close the distance, to prove what he'd felt was real, and she saw the longing in it, raw and unguarded, and it frightened her worse than the flare had. His voice had gone rough and careful. "Sable, I think that was." It was nothing. Her heart was slamming so hard she was sure he could hear it. She was already pulling away, reaching for her jacket, rebuilding every wall the last hour had knocked flat. "It was that. Just that. It doesn't mean anything." Vale went very still. Nothing, he repeated, quietly. And she watched something close behind his eyes. The warmth bank itself to embers. The mask. Come back. Not all the way, but enough. Right. Of course, nothing at all. But something in his voice had shifted, flat and far off. The tone of a wolf just told a thing stings, and deciding not to show it, he rose, dressed, and by the time he turned back, the easy smile was almost home. "Tomorrow's the gala," he said. "Rourke, his heir, the whole board watching my delicate news second. Wear whatever you please, though I'm told it's the done thing to make an effort." A pause, and for 1 second the real thing surfaced, wounded and plain, before it went back under. "Stay close to me in that room, Sable. Whatever else tonight was or wasn't." He reached the door. "It's the one place I can't watch my own back." Then he was gone, and Sable stood alone, jacket half-fastened, body still humming, the low, sick certainty that the things she'd just lied about, the things she'd felt pour through her skin from his, had not felt invented at all. It had felt like a bond. That was the part she couldn't get her hands around. He'd manufactured a mate bond for the tower's benefit, a fiction. He'd all but told her to her face, to keep the board from asking questions. You didn't invent a bond and then feel it. You didn't feel one at all unless it was there, real, growing in the dark whether you'd consented or not. And a bond needed two. Which meant either she was losing her mind, or Emmerich Vale had been telling one small buried piece of the truth from the very first morning. She did not sleep. She'd never learned how. When something was wrong, her whole life, fear had come out sideways as work. So she went down to the security floor and pulled the cancellation log she'd been picking at all week, and this time followed one thread to its end. The double the East Bay order, the wasteful one, Vale had told her to cut, had been cancelled before she ever touched it. That night, minutes after, she'd flagged it in front of him. Cancelled clean, stamped with an override credential from 3 levels above her, one that had no business reaching into a night floor work order at all. She stared at the authorizing code she wasn't cleared to trace, and felt the whole shape of the week tilt a quarter turn. Somebody upstairs was watching her watch, and they'd moved to tidy the evidence the same night she'd noticed it. She closed the file. She did not run the credential. Not yet. Not alone. Not at 4 in the morning. Not until she understood which of the men in this tower she could afford to be wrong about. But her hand, resting on the desk, had drifted to the knife at her hip without her deciding to. And that terrified her more than any 4 men with rapt faces ever could. Sable had run security on 100 events in that grand hall. She'd never once stood in the middle of one as a guest. Now here she was in deep green silk that cost more than she earned in a season. A knife dressed up as a dessert fork. She spotted Emmerich across the floor, and he gave her a smile. Slow, private, the one he'd worn that morning when she'd bolted, before either had to speak, and the knot beneath her ribs let go despite every order she'd given it. "You could stop a room's heart in that dress," he murmured, arriving at her side. "I look like I got dressed up for a costume party. You look like something I'd fight to keep." His eyes were warm. "Which makes me the most fortunate wolf in a very tall building." Heat climbed her throat. Flattery, observation. He drew her hand through the crook of his arm. "Come, let me walk you slowly past every wolf in this room, so each of them gets a good long look at what's mine." He steered her through the crowd and she let herself be steered, leaning into the warm weight of his palm at the small of her back. He drew her out onto a stone terrace, where the music went thin and the night came up cool off the city, and for a moment neither said anything. "You hate this," she said, studying him. She could read him now, the real smile from the scaffolding, and out here, with the party sealed behind glass, it had been costing him a while. "That's a heavy word for it," he said, watching the dancers through the arch. "You're lying to me." He huffed a laugh caught out. "So I am." He turned to face her, the polished ease draining from his expression, the thing underneath worn down to the grain. I've been standing in rooms like this since I was 19. Wearing the right face, saying the lines, being precisely the alpha the crowd needs to see, so not one of them ever looks close enough to find the places where I'm not him at all. Most days I can't work out whether that makes me good at my job, or just— He stopped, shook his head. The smile he reached for came out threadbare. Or just what? She said. Nothing. Ignore me. Too much champagne, not enough. The smile widened and cracked at the seams. Amaric. He held her eyes, and for a heartbeat she watched him brace. The set of a wolf who feels a hand reaching toward the one part nobody is allowed to touch. She laid her hand along his jaw, his breath snagged. The counterfeit smile fell apart under her palm. You're not the wolf they think they're looking at, she said quietly. You're a great deal more than the show you put on for them. And the one underneath the show, she paused. I've grown fond of him, fonder than I meant to. Something split open behind his eyes. Sable, he said, wrecked, and kissed her, fierce and grateful and half desperate. And she went into it, into him, and the ground shifted. It was not the heat, this time. This was the other thing again, the one from the equipment room, only stronger, undeniable now that she'd felt it once. His heart running straight into hers through the bond she'd sworn to his face wasn't there. Relief, terror, a tenderness fierce enough to scare her, and not one thread of it hers. She tore back with a gasp. His eyes had gone dark and wide. You felt it? He breathed. Not a question this time. Sable. That was. It came out as almost nothing. She hadn't the denial left in her a second time. She hadn't the truth in her either. So she gave him neither, and turned her face away, and felt him go quiet and careful at her side. The wounded register, the one she kept putting there. A server materialized at the terrace's edge, a silver tray on one flat palm. 2 glasses of red wine, near black in the moonlight. Sir, the man murmured, offering it up. Amaric, still watching her, still bleeding quietly, reached for one. Sable's wolf came up snarling. Every alarm she owned went off at once. Wrong, wrong, and she didn't stop to reason it through. She struck, knocking the glass from his hand before his fingers had properly closed. It burst against the flagstones. Her other hand shackled his wrist. Don't drink that. She was already crouching over the dark spreading between the shards, dragging air across the back of her tongue. Under the wine. You smell it. She watched his nostrils widen as it reached him, the flat, bitter mineral note beneath the fruit. Wolfsbane, she said. Refined down and concentrated, that much drops an alpha where he stands. A little past that, stops his heart in his chest. She looked up at him, kneeling now in the wreckage, beside her, and beneath. The wine and poison, she could smell his own scent, warm, familiar, safe. And the whole picture turned her stomach. If she'd nursed her wounded pride one breath longer, he'd already be dying at her feet. Sable, his free hand folded over hers. You will say nothing. To no one. She stared at him. Not to Doll. Not to the watch. No one at all. His face had gone hard. Not scared, but calculating fast. There's a foreign alpha 30 feet through that glass, and his only heir beside him. If it gets out that a wolf tried to poison me at my own table, under my own roof, this city is at war before the band finishes the song. So you, she gestured at the glittering ruin. Straighten your jacket, walk back in, dance. Behave as though no one just tried to murder you. Yes, she could have shaken him. That's 3 times in a month, Amaric. You're being hunted, and I can't keep you alive if you tie my hands. Sable, he closed both of his around hers. Trust me, once. I know exactly what this is, and exactly what I'm doing. His thumb moved slow across her knuckles. Let me have tonight my way. Can you give me that? Every trained instinct said no, but the ghost of his heart was still warm against the inside of her ribs, and, What she heard herself say was, "Fine. I promise." The relief that crossed his face was real. He pressed his lips to her forehead, and the warmth rolled through the bond a third time, and then he sealed himself over again. The easy carriage, the untroubled mouth, the alpha who has never once lost hold of anything. "Give me an hour," he said. "Stay near the doors." She nodded. Her voice had abandoned the field. Then he was gone, and she stood alone on the terrace with broken glass and a slick of wine, and the cold understanding that she'd just lied to a wolf she'd fallen in love with. She'd sworn to leave it in his hands. Someone had just tried to end him, and he'd walked back through those doors, wearing a smile. She counted to 30 under her breath. Then she went after him. She held to the edges of the room and watched him work the floor, the warm nod, the deflected question, the hand on a shoulder, then watched him ease through a service door, the smile dropping off his face, the second he believed himself unseen. She trailed him 2 flights lower, into the still air of the security level, to the shut door of Merrick Dahl's office. It clicked closed behind him. For a moment, she couldn't get her feet to obey. Then, very quietly, she reached the door and opened it. Merrick stood behind Merrick's desk, the drawers hung open, a sheaf of papers hung from one hand. He looked up. For a long, breathless beat, neither of them moved. "Sable." His voice was very calm, very level. "It isn't what you're about to think it is. Asterisk, asterisk." And Merrick Vale never fumbled for words. He had his answer loaded before you'd finish the question, could walk a hostile boardroom around to applauding the thing it had come in to gut. But now, behind Merrick's desk, with the papers in his fist, he had nothing ready. "Say something," she said. It came out threadbare, his jaw flexed. Her stomach went over a ledge. "Someone tried to put poison in you not 20 minutes ago. You told me to keep it behind my teeth. And then you come straight down here, in the dark, and start turning out my captain's private drawers." Her throat had cinched to a pinhole. "So say it, Emmerich. What am I looking at?" Every alarm she owned howled that this was wrong. And still, she stayed in the open doorway, still left it open at her back, still held the escape out to him, because only hours ago, she'd stood in his arms with her guard all the way down, and she did not want this to be the thing it so obviously was. He laid the papers down. "I've been looking into Dahl." The sentence refused to mean anything and just noise in the shape of words. "Dahl," she echoed. "Marek, your captain." "Yes." He'd gone quiet, and the quiet was worse than shouting. The cautious voice he kept for skittish board members and foreign alphas. The one that hadn't touched her in weeks. He was using it now. Skimming sabotage? The gear that never lands on your floor? The orders that trip over each other? It was never neglect, Sable. Every piece of it was on purpose. A security floor drained a little at a time. Quiet and patient, straight into Corvain Holdings. And the wolves who keep coming for my life have been spending Corvain's money to do it. The floor dropped out beneath her. "No," she said. He came around the desk slow, no sudden motion, Sable. She gave up a step and he halted where he stood. "That's... Merrick wouldn't. You don't know him. He isn't." She stopped. Because, under the din of not Merrick, never, Merrick, something cold and methodical had begun fitting itself together. "You wanted someone who knew Dahl's operation from the inside," she heard herself say. "Someone who wasn't in on the rot. Someone you could keep at your own back while you built the case against him. That's the whole reason you took the bet in that bar, isn't it? You'd been hunting for exactly that. And a drunk idiot climbed onto a stool and handed herself to you." He said nothing. He met her eyes and did not tell her she was wrong. "Tell me I'm wrong." Her voice fractured. "Emmerich, tell me." He looked at her a long moment. She watched him hunt for the words and fail to find any that were also a denial. She dragged her hands down her face. She'd been so stupid. Every question of his, the roster, the stockroom, who carried the credentials while Dahl was off the floor, and she'd let herself imagine it was her he found interesting. "The whole of it," she whispered. Every bit of it was a lie. Not the whole of it. He advanced a step. She gave ground into the corridor. He stopped again. I won't stand here and pretend the contract didn't start as a way in. But it stopped being only that. Then why not just take him? She cut across. You're the alpha. If you're this certain, put him in a cell. Being alpha doesn't put me out of reach. He scrubbed a hand over his face. Dahl owns the loyalty of every officer under this roof. An old name, dangerous friends, 30 years of trust banked. If I move on him with a suspicion and no proof, there's blood in the stairwells by breakfast and half my own security pointing their weapons the wrong way. Tyrants cage whoever unsettles them, and then act shocked at the knife 3 years down the road. I had to be certain. I couldn't so much as touch him until I had something not one living wolf could talk his way around. It was a good answer, and she resented it for being good. You've got him wrong, she snapped. He held the papers out to her. His voice had gone to gravel. Then read them. He's draining your floor to the studs. Your floor? Sable. The worn-out wolves you climbed up on a bar stool to defend. Read it, and then tell me, I've got him wrong. She wouldn't look. Because Marek was the one thing in her life that had never turned out to be a lie. Marek had dragged her up out of nothing, at 13, seen something worth saving in a plain, spitting girl. No one else had spared a glance. Not everyone's built like you, she said. Some wolves are simply what they claim to be. The tears came, and she let them go. Is that the reason you kept it from me? You thought I was in it beside him. You thought I was his. No. His hand snapped out. Gods, no. Sable. If there was one wolf in this building I ruled out on the first night, it was you. That brought her up short. Why? She said, before she could bite it back. Because you were drunk. Something that wasn't quite a laugh escaped him. Drunk wolves haven't got the equipment to lie. It powers down. They just cough up the true thing and then ruin your shoes. And the true thing you coughed up, from the top of that stool, was that every rotten inch of my tower was my own doing. That I was careless. That I hadn't the faintest notion how my own people scraped by. His mouth bent. Half my board holds that exact opinion. Not a single one of them would ever put it to my face. You did. That's how I knew you weren't a part of any of it. He closed half the distance. She didn't retreat, and he closed a little more. So there's a thing I'll ask you, and I don't think it'll land well, he said low. That night, was it you who decided the careless young alpha was the root of the whole mess? Or was it something the good captain walked you toward over 100 late shifts spent unpicking the sabotage he'd laid out for you? Her mouth opened. Nothing came, because she could hear it now. Marek, across years of burnt coffee and worse hours, grinding his teeth over the boy in the penthouse. He's too busy with his shareholders to notice. An alpha ought to know what rots in his own house. Her lines in the bar, his. She'd been reciting his complaints for years as if they'd grown on her, never once catching that they'd never been hers. You should have told me, she said, unsteady. You watched me step in front of a blade for you. Twice. I bled for you in that garage. I let you past every wall I had, and through the whole of it, you never once handed me the truth. Why not me, Emmerich? When it came, the answer was hardly more than breath. Because I didn't think you'd believe me. I didn't think you'd take my word over his. And I was right, wasn't I? It struck like an open hand, because it was true. So she went around it, to the older bruise, the one that had lived in her long before him. Wolves like you, she said, don't look at women like me and see anything but something useful. And you sat across a dinner from me, and let me believe I'd read that wrong. She turned for the door. Good night, Vale. Sable, his voice cracked. Please. There's a poisoner loose in this tower and a foreign alpha upstairs, and he hauled himself back, reached for better words. I need you, please. And there it was. Even now with her whole heart scattered across Marek's floor. I need you. Not forgive me. Not I can't bear to lose you. Even now a thing he was short of, and wanted back. She walked out into the dark corridor. Asterisk, asterisk, none of it had been real. Sable drove the heels of both hands into her eye sockets until color bloomed behind them. She'd been such a fool. Ren. The word came down the corridor, quiet as a blade on a table. Marek stood 10 paces off, unmoving, as though he'd been waiting in the dark for the sound of her coming apart. Her feet started toward him before her head could vote. This was the wolf who'd found her at 13 and spent years turning her into someone who could keep her feet under her sable. His hands settled on her shoulders. Look at me. You've gone the color of chalk, and because the weight was more than she could hold alone, she told him that it had been a lie. That veil had never wanted her, that he'd only ever wanted a way in, close to, and there the sentence ran out of road. Marek's face gentled. I know, he said. I'd hoped you'd never have to hear it. I'm sorry, Sable. I'm sorry, he said again softer. And I'm afraid it runs deeper than you know. He drew a breath, and his jaw set. It's Rourke's girl, the heir, Inez. She didn't consent, Sable. He drugged her, left her ruined on purpose. So her father would have no way out but to put his name to the merger. I walked in on the end of it myself. Not an hour passed. She looked at him, trying to force the words into something that held. What? She got out. Emerick was a liar. She had that proof still bleeding under her ribs, and yet she knew, bone deep, he would not do this. And then the part of her that spent its nights, untangling knots, went to work on his sentence. Not an hour passed, but an hour passed. Emerick had been on the terrace with her, watching poisoned wine burst across the stone. Nowhere near the girl. None of it fit, which left only one thing that fit. Merrick was lying to her. The wolf who'd hauled her up out of nothing stood in a dim hallway lying into her face with the ease of long practice. And if Marek was the liar, then everything Emerick had bled onto that office desk was true. The drained accounts, the killers spending Corvain's coin. Her fingers twitched toward her hip. She stopped them. Not here. Not one officer alone against the wolf who held the loyalty of every gun in the building. Merrick wanted her wrecked and furious and desperate, to think the worst of the man who'd used her, so that was the wolf she gave him. What do we do? She asked, and let her face fall to pieces. Something sharpened in his eyes that had never been grief. We take it to Rourke before Vale gets ahead of it. A wolf who'd drug a man's daughter has no business holding a city. He'll fall, and steadier hands are ready to catch it. Corvain's among them. The name sat sweet on his tongue. But it can't come from me. I run his security. They'll call it a grab for his chair. It has to be a voice the room can't dismiss. His own voice dropped, went almost kind. It has to be yours, his own intended. Stand up and tell Rourke you saw Vale take the girl, and not a wolf in that suite will doubt a syllable. They walked, and it was the longest walk of her life. She had to reach that room and flip Merrick's trap with nothing but her word. And one wrong syllable would tip the city into war. Rourke had claimed a conference suite in the East Wing. Imerick was already inside. He glanced up when she came through the door at Merrick's shoulder, and for half a second his whole face opened toward her like a window thrown wide. Then he clocked whose shoulder it was, and the light went out all at once. Alpha Rourke. Merrick bowed his head. It grieves me to carry this to you, but your daughter has been gravely wronged by the wolf at your right hand. He laid it out smooth and terrible. The drug, an alliance bought with the girl's ruin. That's a lie, Emerick said. Every word of it belongs to him. He'd say exactly that, Merrick returned. Naturally he would, but his own bride was in the building tonight. He turned, and the whole room turned on its hinge with him. Toward Sable, silent by the door. Everyone here can see. The girl loves him. She has every reason under the sky to cover for the wolf she's promised to. He opened a hand toward her. So, put it to her. Sable, tell your Alpha what you saw. Every face in the suite swung to her. Rourke tipped forward, desperate. Merrick's people already tallying the win. And Emerick, certain now that she'd come down here to finish what the office had started. She looked at him. I'm sorry, she told him, without a word. I should have believed you the first time. Then she faced Rourke. I saw no such thing, she said. Because there was nothing to see. Captain Dahl is lying to you. The room drew tight as a bowstring. Merrick went rigid at her side. He tells you it happened within the hour, she went on. But within the hour, your host was out on his own terrace with me, watching a glass of poisoned wine break at his feet. The third attempt on his life, inside a month. He was nowhere near your daughter. She squared herself to Rourke. Don't take it, on my word. Send wolves to the captain's office, right now, while he's standing in front of you and can't get near it. See for yourself whether you turn up a wronged girl, or a ledger routed to Corvain Holdings, and enough refined wolfsbane to drop an alpha mid-stride. This is hysteria, Merrick said, and the calm came apart down the center of him. She's out of her mind with grief. Then the search costs you nothing, Rourke said, mild, and tipped his head at his own guards. And the thing in Merrick's face changed. The grave, steady captain simply wasn't there anymore. What stood in his place was cornered. He moved straight at her, and she caught the knife clearing his sleeve half a beat before it reached her. Sable, Emmerich's voice, torn ragged with fear. But of everything the night had thrown at her, this she knew in her bones. She stepped into him instead of clear, trapped the knife arm, hauled it around, and let his own weight carry him down until his face met the floor. Her knee came to rest between his shoulder blades, and she bent close to his ear. You're the one who drilled me on this hold, Merrick, she said. You of all wolves should have remembered where it ends. Then Rourke's guards were on him, dragged him up and out, and it was finished. Rourke went to his daughter first. Ina's safe, asleep in her rooms untouched. The advisors broke into low, hurrying knots. The guards marched Merrick off. And then there were only the two of them left. Emmerich hadn't moved. He was watching her like a wolf, finally seeing a thing he'd never managed to see clearly. You just saved my life, he said, after everything I did. You still. I came to stop a traitor, she said, level. Nothing past that. The light in his face dimmed. Sable, the bond. He hesitated on it. It's real. You felt it hit tonight. I know you did. Whether it's real changes nothing. Her voice was as cold as the floor she'd just put Marek into. I stopped him because it's my job and because he was a traitor. Not 1 second of it was you being forgiven. You used me, Emmerich. The hope went out of him by degrees. I love you, he said. I don't care how it started. That isn't the same as what it turned. Don't, she gave ground. 1 step. Every nerve she owned was howling at her to let him cross the space, and she was done listening to it. You can hold bond up like it wipes the slate clean. You looked me in the eye for a week and used me anyway. No bond scrubs that off. I'm sorry, he said. I don't want it. She turned toward the door. I'm glad you're breathing. You'll make a good alpha for this city. A beat. But I can't trust you, and I honestly don't know if that ever comes back. She watched it reach him, the understanding, plain in his eyes, that he'd broken a thing that doesn't mend to whole. Sable, please. I'll do anything you... She walked out, asterisk. She'd been chief of security for half a year now, and she was good at it. She had never once doubted she would be. The tower ran differently now. Merrick sat in a cell under the old district precinct, and the rot he'd worked into the floor for years had been cut back to clean wood. Corvain's hooks came out of the walls the moment he did, and Merrick had carved a traitor out of his own house without letting the blood reach the street, and the city had begun, warily, to warm to him for it. He'd handed her the chief's post. He'd also spent 5 of those 6 months trying, with a patience that led nowhere, to win her back. He opened with flowers, a month in. She came off a dawn shift to find the whole bullpen buried under them, her own people wearing identical idiot grins, hanging back to see what she'd do. The children's ward gets these, she said, all of them. Today. The war room was his next attempt. She took her place at the ops table twice a week. Now he forever, on the far side of it. Every so often he'd catch her eye, and his face would tip towards something hopeful and unsure, and she'd drop her gaze to the deployment maps until it passed. Afterward, he'd invent a reason to hover near the door. "Chief," he'd say. "Quiet. A moment." She walked past him every time. The bond fought her. An open bond only digs deeper. Let it dig long enough, and it sets like poured concrete. So she held hers shut with both fists and told herself it would starve and turn her loose. Meanwhile, the letters came. His own hand. 2 and 3 a week. Some a single line. Some whole pages. Some had nothing to do with her. A posting she'd once flagged. A snarl in the pension accounts. As though her opinion were still worth the asking. One read, "I've written the same words so many ways it's losing its shape. Sorry. It's a small word for a large thing, and it's the only one I own. So I'll keep sending it until it wears through." Another, "You said I felt near enough to share a bed with and too far off to trust with the truth. That was the whole of it. I didn't earn what you gave me. I spent it. Nothing I've ever done sits worse." And one, buried at the foot of a long page, she'd promised herself she wouldn't read to the end of. "I'm not asking you back because you're useful to me. I'm asking because none of the rest of it means anything if you aren't beside me for it." Neve and Tobin were never short of an opinion. "Good," Neve said. "In the early weeks. Let him stew. You owe that wolf precisely nothing." A couple of months on, the position had migrated. He cleared the whole back pay. "Backlog," Tobin mentioned one night. "And he's written you, what? 40 times. 43, said Neve, who was evidently keeping a tally. By the 5th month, they dropped the pretense of subtlety. "Chief," Neve said. "Respectfully, go and speak to the man. There's nothing to say. You're wretched, he's wretched. And the rest of us are stuck standing out in the rain of the two of you." Sable put down her pen. "I was used, Nave. I'm not signing up for a second round of it. The floor runs clean. I'd like to be left alone to keep it that way." Then, one night in the 6th month, a letter came that read differently. "Sable, I'm sorry. You deserved a great deal better than I gave you. You've said your piece, and I'll honor it. I'm going to stop now." It was the exact thing she'd been demanding for months, so she couldn't account for why it landed, like something lost. He was as good as his word. The flowers stopped. The letters stopped. When they passed in a corridor, he'd give her a nod. Chief, even and courteous. Not cold, he was never cold. Only finished. "This is what you asked for," she reminded herself. And every night the warm, patient thread under her ribs refused to fade, right up until the knock came. Tobin came through her office door at speed, Neve a step behind, both the particular ash-gray of people who've just made a very large mistake. "What?" Sable said, slow. "What did you do?" "He's gone." Neve swallowed hard. "The alpha. Off the grounds entirely. Not in the penthouse, not in the tower, not anywhere we've looked. No car signed out. His phone's still sitting on the desk." She swallowed again. "Nobody's laid eyes on him since 10 last night. Asterisk? Asterisk. Tell me this is a joke," Sable said, already certain it wasn't. "Nothing's missing," Tobin said miserably. "Coat's on the hook, blades on the stand. The room's just tidy. And empty." She was on her feet before she decided to stand. Last sighting, who, and where, which door? Her belt was already in her hands. Get the trackers up. Pull his scent off the penthouse and every ground exit. Quiet. No alarms. If this leaks, we'll have a stampede before sunrise. They moved. The trackers ran his scent to a service door on the east face and lost it, the way a trail stops when a wolf has taken pains to kill it, or is no longer walking on his own feet. Sable stood in the loading yard, the pre-dawn wind knifing through her jacket, and understood only one way remained to find him. She'd known it the instant gone, left Neve's mouth. She flattened a hand over the bond she'd spent half a year trying to smother. "This is duty," she told herself. "He's the alpha. Finding him is the job." It wasn't only that, and she knew it. She opened the bond. It broke over her like a floodgate. Grief first, wide and floorless. The mirror of the one she'd been hauling around for months. Then a fury pointed inward. then a thick sliding muddle, his thoughts unmooring, slow and heavy. Drugged, she thought, and she was running before the word finished, out into the dark, hand over hand along the pull of him. The bond towed her out of the district into the low city. The pinched streets the dawn hadn't found yet. She came up on a bar with warm light behind its glass and went through the door, low and ready hand, on her knife, set for an ambush, a body, and stopped. Dead, because it was the Long Watch, the very same bar, and there was nothing waiting for her but the alpha of the entire city, folded half across the far end of the counter, collar undone, hair past saving, one hand loose around a glass, holding forth with great sincerity to a put-upon bartender. Neva caught up behind her out of breath. Is he drunk? Sable took in the way he leaned on the bar, rather than the reverse, the upper half of him drifting, after each gesture like a tree in wind. Oh, Nev started he is. Relief reached her first, bright and total. He was alive and whole and safe. The rage came a half step behind. She was going to strangle him herself. She got near enough to hear. I have apologized, he was informing the bartender with feeling. At length, by every means available to a civilized wolf. She will not hear one word of it. The bartender produced the grunt of a man who'd been receiving this bulletin for some while. There were letters, Emmerich added. Have I mentioned the letters? You have, said the bartender. She reached the counter and lifted the glass straight out of his fingers. That's the end of that. The bartender turned on her a look of unfiltered gratitude. I was working on that, Emmerich objected, and then his eyes landed on her face and caught. He blinked. His whole wrecked expression broke open into something so purely glad, it was hard to look it head-on. Sable, he said. And down the still open bond she felt it crash into him all at once, joy and disbelief and relief with nothing left holding them back. What? She said low and vibrating with temper. Did you think you were doing? Walking off like that? No detail? No note? No ease up? He flapped a hand and nearly followed it off the stool. I'd have been home before a soul noticed I'd stepped out. The entire watch noticed. I noticed. She got him upright, and he sagged into her warm and heavy, and carrying the scent she'd spent 6 months refusing to name. I didn't know you at the start, he mumbled into her shoulder, evidently, midway through some argument she hadn't attended. And then I knew you, and I loved you, and I got so frightened of losing you that I never handed you the truth. That was cowardice. Mine? Yes, she said it was. You never found out what the 7th day was for. His head lolled against her shoulder. That was the day I meant to ask you to stay. For good, not as cover, not for the merger. Then the whole thing blew up a day short of it, and there it was, the answer to the one question she'd made herself stop asking months ago. Same as the cowardice you're at right now, she went still. Excuse me. You'd sooner choke a bond, a line running straight between two actual souls, Sable, than risk the once more of getting hurt. He steered an unsteady finger toward the general vicinity of her nose. Coward! I am not a then prove otherwise. His eyes were drifting shut. Marry me. The world came to a full stop. Say that again. Marry me. He reached for dignified and arrived somewhere nearer, begging. I dare you, stay. Marry me and stay, and I'll spend the rest of my life paying back every single day. I lied to you. On my life. I'll. The words gave out and he dropped his head into one hand, and the raw sincerity of it came flooding down the bond, wide open. No angle to it, no mask. The wolf who hid everything, hiding not one single thing. Ask me again tomorrow, she said. Sober, when you'll actually remember having asked. His eyes dragged half open. And the answer will be yes, he murmured, like a wolf laying down a bet he couldn't afford to lose. She opened her mouth to answer, and the alpha of the entire city dropped into a dead faint against her shoulder, his head coming to rest in the curve of her neck, his breath reeking of the Long Watch's very cheapest whiskey. And Sable stood there in the gray coming light and felt her own mouth curve for the first time in 6 months. She set a kiss against his forehead, his ruined hair soft under her lips, and murmured, "Ask me tomorrow. Ask. And find out. Asterisk, asterisk. In the end, 4 months was what it took him. 4 whole months of the asking, daily, and sober in every sense. A wolf can be sober. Across the ops table, until Neve swore she'd hand in her notice. Up on the freezing roof deck with 2 coffees turning to ice in his fists, clumsily and beautifully. And every day she sent him off to try again tomorrow, until one ordinary morning she raised her eyes to the wolf, grinning at her over breakfast, as if his whole life balanced on it, and told him yes. The boy Alpha no one had thought worth taking seriously, and the plain chief of security, who'd spotted the wolf behind the smile before anybody bothered to check. There was one. He wept through the vows. She'd warned him he would. She held out, barely, though the bond told on her anyway, and he laughed at her through his own tears until she gave up minding who saw. "Stuck with me for good now," he said against her ear, when it was done. "No giving it back." "Why on earth would I take it back?" said Sable. "I'm the one who proposed a contract first, if you'll recall, drunk on a bar stool, in front of 30 witnesses. Cleverest thing I ever agreed to," Emmerich concluded, and kissed her. For once, she let it stand.